If you're watching this video, you have either had a Katana or a Mark II, and you're wondering if the Gen 3 is worth the upgrade and what are the differences. Or maybe this might be your first Katana amp and you're doing your research. And if that is the case, I highly encourage you to watch as many review videos of the Gen 3 as you can, and maybe some Mark II tutorials to get a better feel for what this amp is all about before you buy it. There are some differences between the Mark II and the Gen 3, but they aren't huge. Let's take a look at what's new.
On the amp, you have some additions to the panel. On the panel, you now have a solo button, a contour button, cabinet resonance switch, and you also have a new amp to choose from called Push, which sounds like a slightly compressed and boosted clean amp that works well for blues and rock, although I'm sure you can achieve the same tone from the clean or crunch amp with the right adjustments. On the back, you have all the same things that you had on the 100 Mark II, and some of them are just labeled differently. The phones and record out is now called stereo phones, and if you have a TRS splitter, you can record out to an interface in stereo. It has USB-C now instead of USB-B, or as some people like to call it, a printer cable. You can record in stereo from the USB-C as well. And lastly, you have the Bluetooth adapter port, but you'll need to purchase the Bluetooth transmitter separately for about $60. All of the Boss foot switches that work with the Mark I and Mark II still work, and that includes the GAFC and EX. Everything else on the amp, with the exception of the logo, looks about the same. The texture of the cabinet looks a little different, as you can see from these two pictures. The texture is just a little bit deeper on the Gen 3. Now, are the speakers the same? They appear to be, but the Gen 3 looks to have a new label on it. Jumping into tone stereos, things look almost the same as the Mark II. There's not a drastic change as there was from the Mark I to the Mark II software, but there are some nice changes. The basic panel editor is the same except for the resonance knob, which allows you to adjust the low-end frequencies. And they took the contour knob and turned it into a little button up here, and you still make adjustments to the parameters of the contour down here. Now over here, you do have these little tips boxes you'll sometimes see with some of the effects, and this particular one tells you what each one of the contour types does. But for like some of the effects, if you put it on the blues drive, it'll show you a little thing over here, and you can click on it and read an article about the blues driver. Down here in the chain, it gives you a more visualized effects chain with adjustments. Now you can click and drag effects and move them around a bit, but you don't have completely free range. You can only drag and drop them where it'll let you. So once you click on the top here and start dragging it about, you'll see these blue little dots over here. That'll show you where you are allowed to drop it. Now, once you get to the point where it turns white, then you can drop it where it is. But it's still very limited to what you can do. Now, unlike the Mark II, you can actually put the boost after the effects and mod, which is something you couldn't do before, but you cannot put the effects before the mod, which doesn't really matter because the mod, you can put the mod before or after the boost, and the mod and the effects, if you don't already know it, have all the same pedals on it. Like before, EQs can go before or after the amp equalizer. Your send and return can now go pre-foot volume, post-foot volume, or post-reverb. There are no new boosts or effects or delays or reverb whatsoever on the Gen 3. As I mentioned, the send and return, now you've got pre-foot volume, post-foot volume, and post-reverb. That's a little different than it was before. Now the assign functions, they have really cleaned this up. If you don't remember what the assign function looked like on the Mark II, let's switch over to the Mark II software real quick. And as you can see, when you wanted to select a function and assign that function to like the expression pedal on the GAFC expression 1, you would have to assign it to whatever mod you had. And let's say if you went up to the mod and you had chorus, you turn that on, you go back over to assign, so you got the mod, and then you'd have to scroll through and find that particular one and then choose what it does. Whereas in the Gen 3, if it's on and you go back over to assign, it'll show you right there, mod, flanger, and then you can adjust the preset. And they did do this all the way across the board, and it looks so much better than the Mark II does. Even the knobs in the Mark II, it was like everything was right there. Gen 3, nice and cleaned up. So That is a huge difference, and it's a very good difference in the software. So those are the basic differences within the editor. Now the library is exactly the same as it was before. Nothing has changed on it. The tone exchange, it looks a little different basically because it's just Gen 3 stuff. And they said with the Katana Go that in June they are supposed to integrate the Boss tone exchange online into the tone exchange through the software, but it's in late June right now and we still haven't seen that. So I still hope it happens. System settings aren't a whole lot different either. The line out settings aren't much different. You do now have a visualization for the microphone position in the custom settings for line out. You can adjust your distance and it kind of shows you what it is. It's like I said, it's a nice visual touch. And you also have the addition of this ambience pre-delay and ambience level under there. You still have the same 5 microphones and the same line out airfields. Everything else is almost the same, except now you can change your icon settings. Like when I showed you the change, you saw all the pretty pictures. Well, you have to load them in. It takes a little bit of work, and I did do a tutorial video on that. I will link at the end of this. And it just adds a nice little aesthetic when you're looking at the chain. So instead of just looking at the little buttons that kind of look like whatever they are, you can assign it pedals to what they actually are, and it just looks cool, that's all.
One of the main questions I get is, does it sound the same? Boss did say they revoiced the amps, and there are a few videos that do some comparisons, but in my opinion, they simply sound slightly boosted and a little compressed, and it's nothing you probably couldn't do with the EQ adjustments. But again, that's just my opinion. Also, I don't really like how most of the Mark II patches sound in the Gen 3 because of that. To me, they sound slightly different. For now, and probably for a long time, this will be the only video I do for the Gen 3. I didn't buy this amp. I requested this amp from Zounds.com on loan for the purpose of this review, and it'll be going back soon. I don't see any sense in putting a ton of time into more how-to videos, seeing that it's not a big change from the Mark II. You can learn how to use most everything for the Gen 3 from my comprehensive Mark II guide video. So it all comes down to this. Is the Katana Gen 3 a great amp? Absolutely. Especially since it doesn't sell for much more than what the Mark II does. But, now this is a big old fat but, and I'm just trying to be completely honest. If you already have a Mark II, I would not rush out to buy the Gen 3. It's just not that big of a change to justify buying a whole new amp. It's not like the major differences that they had going from the Mark I to the Mark II in both software and hardware. It's just not. The changes are very subtle. Now, it's still another fantastic product from Boss, but most of these changes are rather subtle, and I'm completely happy with the Mark II. But if you absolutely, positively have got to have it, there will be a affiliate link down in the pinned comment and description. And that does help support this channel. So I hope this video has been helpful. And if you like it, hit that like button for me. And if you're not a subscriber, subscribe for more reviews like this. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you again.